This is the third forum of anti-racist electoral action. We have a 60-minute event tonight, and hopefully our panelists can still stay even though we've gotten backed up. And if you have to leave, we totally understand. We want to make sure that we have engagement with the people who've come into attendance tonight, to have some Q&A at the end. So even though we want to hear as much as we can about your organization, if you can try to keep it on the more brief side, that would be great to maximize interaction with our attendees. Antiracist Electoral Action is a grassroots organization that aims to accelerate anti-racist progress by increasing awareness about the importance of electoral politics at every level of governance. Tonight's event is the third in a series where we will be discussing and strategizing anti-racist electoral politics at the local, state, and federal level. In doing so, we hope to empower voters to make the best use of the ballot box alongside other tools of anti-racist change. We are interested in talking with people who not only denounce bigotry, but who are working to root out systems that create and perpetuate racial inequality. Anti-racist electoral action is not committed to any political party, only political principles and action. Our founding members here tonight are myself, Tehama Lopez-Bunyasi, Sekou Franklin, and Andrea Benjamin, also Andy Shala, who is not able to be with us tonight. Although we wear many hats in our individual lives, our work with the anti-racist electoral action is in our capacity as private citizens, and our views are our own. The views of our guests belong to them as well. We're grateful to have as our guest tonight, Dulce Rojas, Voto Latino's campaign coordinator, Kara Turrentine, founder and CEO of Turrency Political LLC, which is a campaign management consulting and advertising firm that has assisted a dozen grassroots political campaigns. We have Oliver Semans, co-founder of Four Directions, which does high-intensity voter engagement in Native communities in the Dakotas, Arizona, and Minnesota. And we have Becky Belcore, executive director of NAKASEC. Welcome to you all. Tonight's theme is electoral justice and voter engagement and anti-racism, how frontline activists engage hard to reach voters. I'm going to turn this over to Andrea now, and she will start asking the questions. Thank you so much again for coming, everybody.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Tehama. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the attendees for being here. We're going to get started with what we're going to call round one tonight, just given the number of panelists. So Dulce, we're going to start with you. Can you tell us about Voto Latino? What is the mission of the organization, and what have you all been doing to get voters ready for this election?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me. I think this always gives me so much energy to keep going instead of just staring at a screen. But my role with the organization is, how do we mobilize volunteers from across the country using our digital tools? And that is something Voto Latino is not new to. We are largely known for being one of the largest digital first organizations pushing on grassroots activations targeting young Latinx to get out to vote and being civically engaged. That is our main focus. Our main target demographic is young Latinx and people of color 18 to 35. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and my role. Thank you again.
Awesome. And could you just tell us again, sort of briefly but succinctly, sort of what are some of the unique challenges that are facing Latinx voters?
Yeah, so part of my role is leading a massive program of text banking with our volunteers and texting out across our 14 key states. And one of the main issues that we've seen right now currently is a distrust in the process of, there's this urgency of, this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime. And how am I going to make sure that my vote gets counted, that I'm not disenfranchised? So, there's already that fear, that distrust. And then on top of that, our community is also facing the unknown of not understanding the vote by mail process, and then all the challenges that come with it in our community, and I'm pretty sure in the other communities as well. But even in my own family, right, we have these long luxurious names, like I'm Dulce Rojas Mendez, right? Or, there's Jose Alejandro Garcia Rivera. And sometimes when you arrive to the country, you shorten it or you're forced to shorten it. Like in my case, when I became a citizen, I was told just the first and last, first and last. So now I'm no longer Dulce Rojas Mendez, I'm Dulce Rojas. But it varies, every time you're filling out a form. So with the vote by mail process, it's so important that our communities start to learn that, when signing off on the ballot, when bringing your ID, that everything matches up, that they're reading the fine print on the type of ink to use, if you're in a state that requires additional documentation. So this whole process has been one of the biggest issues that we've been seeing when tax banking, and we've been trying to help out people understand that. And then the second biggest issue has been disinformation. There's a huge campaign targeting our communities using unconventional methods, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. And we're really trying to make sure that those that are active are reaching those that are non-active, and making sure that they have the right information to make educated vote, and with facts, real facts, not alternative facts. I can definitely keep going, but I definitely want to give the space over to others, but just to point out a few more, language accessibility is also a big one. We in the Spanish speaking community, there are resources, but we also think about the Haitian Creole speaking community, the other Asian American communities. So language access is always going to be an issue overall, but this is another barrier for our communities that they're facing.
Thank you. And now we'd like to introduce Becky Belcore to talk about NAKASEC and your mission. Can you break it down for us? Let's see, where is she?
Hi.
Hi.
Yes. Is this the time I should show my presentation?
Yes, are you able to do
I can
that?
try to do it. I will try. Yes.
I can also try to put it into the...
If it works. Okay. Can you see it?
Oh, this is so fancy. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm not very good. Oh gosh. Okay.
This is great. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Becky. I work with an organization called NAKASEC. NAKASEC was founded in 1994. We're a national Asian American organization, and our mission is to organize Korean and Asian Americans to achieve social, racial, and economic justice. We're a network of affiliates. We have affiliates, one here in Greater Philadelphia, which is where I am, which is called Ruby Center. One in Northern Virginia, NAKASEC, Virginia. In Chicago, we have the HANA Center, Green Resource Center in Southern California, and we've also been working with some partners in Houston, especially around civic engagement. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the future and how Asian Americans are part of that future as a community of color in the United States. And so, we're on track to becoming a majority minority country by 2045, they estimate, and that by 2045, as you can see on the slide, that how they believe the population in terms of percentages will be, and that for young people, actually, that this demographic is changing actually even right now, that already young people of color have surpassed the white population of the same age. And so within that context, we as Asian Americans, we're the fastest growing population in the country, and also the fastest growing electorate. Over the last, I guess, 8 or so, or from 2004 to 2012, our voters increased 180%. And it's estimated by 2040 that our population will have almost doubled to 35.7 million Americans. And that this also translates into our electorate power growing as well, that will almost double to 12 million by 2040, and that our overall electorate share will also have increased significantly. That this will make a difference, particularly in swing states like the one that I'm in now with significant Asian American populations. And so, it's commonly thought that Asian Americans have all succeeded in the United States and that we're doing so well, but we think of that as a model minority myth. There are actually many barriers that exist and many challenges that our community faces. So for example, 73% of our folks are recent immigrants, and that about 45% are limited English proficient, which really limits access to American economic, social, educational, and other institutions. That we have the greatest income inequality in the country, and that in certain parts of our community, some of those have the most highest poverty rate in the country. Vietnamese and Korean Americans struggle with access to health insurance and have some of the highest uninsured rates. 1 in every 5 Vietnamese American is uninsured, and then 1 in every 4 Korean American is uninsured. And that, usually when folks think of undocumented immigrants, they don't think of Asian Americans, but actually over 1.5 million of us are undocumented. My community, which is the Korean American community, 1 in every 7 of us is undocumented. And so the main issues that we hear from our community members are ones that impact many, especially immigrant communities of color, which are lack of access to healthcare, to good jobs, problems with the immigration system, lack of access to education, and then of course racial justice issues. So why is this important, or what's at stake? So as our country becomes a people of color majority, that doesn't guarantee that means that we're going to be a country whose values is grounded in human rights and equality. So it's very important that as we do civic engagement work and any kind of work that we're doing, that we're always bringing our community the kind of education that is needed so they can make informed decisions that will benefit the majority of our people. So I'm going to just zero in Pennsylvania, where our work is taking place now, or at least our national team is here now. So you can see the Asian American population is roughly about 500,000. It's had tremendous growth, and we have about 251,000 eligible voters, but of those, less than half are actually registered to vote. We actually have the lowest rates of voter registration and voter turnout in the country. The largest ethnic communities that we're trying to reach out to are Indian, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Filipinx. And then of course, in the electoral landscape, Pennsylvania is very important because it is a state that only went to Trump by 44,000 votes in 2016. So it is a state where our growing community's vote could help make a difference in terms of determining whatever the outcome of the election may be in this 501c3 context. So we are really concentrating on reaching out to our community members. We're actually the community that has the least amount of outreach that is conducted towards us. You can see from some surveys that half of our folks received no voter contact in 2018. Among those who were contacted, 52% were by Democrats, 40% by the Republican Party, and 44% by community organizations. 38% of our folks are not party affiliated, so there's a lot of opportunity in terms of the folks to contact our community members. They haven't decided what party they're part of yet. But in order to do outreach to our community, it must be done like another immigrant in any other community in ways that are culturally and language competent. And so that, as I mentioned before, many of our folks are limited English proficient. So it's important in terms of outreach being able to be done to them so that they can make informed decisions at the polls, that it is done in their native language and also done in a culturally competent way that will reach our community members. And of course, we as Asian Americans reaching out within our own community also can share our common lived experience as a connection of why it's important to register to vote and why it's important for our community to vote in order to build power. And we want to also engage in civic engagement because it is one strategy towards base building and power building for the long term for our community and for all communities of color that we see ourselves as part of. And so, as I mentioned, our Pennsylvania affiliate is the Udi Center. It was just founded at the end of 2018. And our electoral work has been using what we call a values ID strategy. So as we've been calling Korean American voters statewide and young Asian American voters between the ages of 18 and 40 in certain geographies, we have been asking them, do they support a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants? And do they support all people living in the United States having access to quality healthcare, regardless of whether they can afford it. And it is those voters whose values align with ours that we have been then mobilizing through the vote by mail, as was mentioned by the earlier speaker, and also to get out the vote. And you can see the results of this is that what we're finding among young Asian Americans in terms of supporting citizenship for all, there's been an 82% support rate. And for healthcare for all, it's been 92%. And then in the Korean American community, those numbers are somewhat lower, but it's still a majority of our folks that are supporting these important values. So, so once we get out of the election, as I mentioned, it is for making a strategy towards building power for policy change and systemic change in the long run that will benefit our communities. At the state level, Pennsylvania has the highest number of ISRS in the country, so we're hoping to be able to help influence changing that, along with a campaign through Driving Pennsylvania Forward so that all immigrants can have access to driver's license, regardless of immigration status, and the same with access to in-state tuition. And then, of course, at the federal level, we're hoping that we can win legalization for the more than 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, and healthcare for all people in the United States, especially communities of color, ensure our reproductive rights, and ensure the rights of our LGBT members. That's really in the long run what we're trying to achieve. And in the other places where we work, there's also other campaigns that are happening. So for example, in Illinois, which is actually the state that I'm from, we're doing a fair tax campaign because Illinois is still one of the states that doesn't have a progressive income tax system. So that's something that's on the ballot in Illinois this year. So thank you very much for having me as part of this panel. Here's just how you can follow us or look us up if you're interested in more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to add that PDF. It's a PDF into the chat. I'll figure out how to do that somehow while we're on to our next panelist. Thank you so much, Becky, for that presentation.
Yeah, awesome. All right, OJ, you're the co-founder of Four Directions. Tell us how you started Four Directions, and then can you tell us what unique challenges Native and Native American voters are facing with this election?
Yeah, Madaki, we chose on the Awokelo. Basically, I'm saying, hi, my relatives. I pray for your health and help. I am humbled and honored to be a part of this panel. It's so nice to see young people taking over. Four Directions, my wife Barb and I founded it way back in 2000. And what we did is we founded it because we saw that although Native Americans were able to sway or swing elections, the tribes or the tribal members were never given the political credit nor the power to do it. And therefore we started Four Directions so that we could ensure that tribes and tribal members would be have access to the table instead of being the dinner, actually enjoy the dinner. So we've been working at it quite a while. We first started out just to do get out the vote. And as we started, we saw there was so many unequal opportunities that created a burden for our people to participate in the federal and state elections. So from there, we went from a voter education and get out the vote to a voter advocacy group. We've filed 8 federal court cases. We won 7. We just had a hearing before the Ninth Circuit Appellate Court today on mail-in ballots. So, I mean, what I'm hearing here is exactly the same thing that we are dealing with the 574 tribal nations in the United States located in all the other states. So, you know, we're all on the same page. We all know that they use the wording in whatever laws they create in order to keep us from the polls. And I know we're short on time, but I want to tell you something that, you know, we as Indigenous people of America have seen going through the process of trying to participate. You know, everybody's looking at the presidential election. Everybody's looking at the congressional election. And, you know, within this state, Senate and the House, if you have a House. But, you know, we as natives have found that the biggest barrier that provides the most suppression for any person of color is local. it's your local county officials, it's your local election officials. It's the person, I mean, suppression don't start in the state capitol. Suppression can be 3 feet away across from the table you're walking up to in order to cast your ballot. And the reason for this is, and don't get me wrong, we want to take part and we want to be part of this upcoming presidential and congressional elections. But the main reason that these people are putting these type of barriers in your way is to keep you from school boards, keep you from county commissioners, keep you from becoming election officials. Because once you're able to win those local offices, it doesn't matter what they do in the state capitol. You control right there. You can open the door for every person of color to come in and cast their ballot. So I think you look at the bigger picture, but in the end result, what you have to concentrate, your home. And you build out from there and you start taking over on county commissioners. We've done it. We've taken over on county commissioners. We've taken over on school boards. One county, we now have tribal people that are election officials. And so as you're moving forward, that's something that you need to look at as far as, yes, you want a national voice, but once you're able to establish yourself a local voice, then that's where you're going to start creating your power. Thank you.
OJ, you're speaking my language. Everyone who's watching knows local politics is the best politics. And I love that you said that. Thank you for that. Tehma?
Okay, and now thank you so much. I'm really interested in the court cases, but I do want to get to our next panel, so maybe we have time to come back around to that if we can. Kara, you have a bit of a different position here in this panel, I think, and so I'd really like for you to tell everyone here tonight what it is exactly that you do. And if you can give us some kind of illustrate that a bit by talking about your work in South Carolina and Tennessee of late, that would be really informative
Right.
for
Well, thank you all
us.
for having me. My name is Kara Turrentine. I'm the founder and CEO of Turrency Political. We are a national award-winning firm that is a full-service campaign management service and communications firm. And so what that means is we provide campaigns with strategy and direction as they're building out their nuts and bolts of their campaign. We help with their communications. And then we also do digital, direct mail, radio, all of the ways that you talk to people. We provide the creative and strategy around that. And so we've done, every local kind of race you can think of, from council to state legislator to judge. We've done those local municipal races, and we enjoy that. But I'm also formerly senior advisor to Bernie Sanders on the presidential race, and worked for Hillary coordinated campaign in Michigan in 2016. So we've worked the gamut from your local race up through presidential race. And so I spent time working for the Bernie Sanders campaign in South Carolina, helping lead that team, developing strategy, communications, and doing mail, as well as Georgia and Tennessee. And so what I'm also super excited about is hearing from Becky and Dulce. Our firm has done and supported the work that they're doing to talk to voters of color and making sure they know their rights in this election by doing a direct mail piece in multiple languages in Pennsylvania, to folks that they're out there reaching through the voter registration process, by sending them a piece of communication that talks about, their right to vote. What to expect when they go to the polls. Do they need ID? What to do if their address is changed? Who do they call if they have a problem? And so the work that Becky and Dulce are doing is really critical in helping folks go into the voting booth armed with information. And they use firms like mine to get the word out and to develop material and collateral so that people have an unbiased guide in case they have challenges, especially when there's language barriers or changes that are happening in real time in the law, and they want to be sure they're armed with their rights. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Yeah, if I can have one more question from you, is what are you hearing right now on the ground from Black voters about what they want in this election?
So I think it's super important to understand, that there's a continuation of the agenda, right? We've been consistently fighting and hearing people fight for uh, equity, hearing people fight for the importance of, equity under the law, equity in the workplace, equity, in the community and in the way they're represented in the electoral space. And that fight continues. What I think we're seeing now is that a lot of our allies are catching up with us in terms of the urgency that we feel. And as we're beginning to see more open, brazen acts of violence, as we're seeing more open, brazen attitudes towards injustice, our allies are saying, okay, we're sick of this too. In a more open, and it's safer too. It's safer for our allies to be more forthright about how tired they are of it. You see corporations taking a public stand, and you see the intersection between social justice and corporate uh, philanthropy and justice merging together in a way that I don't think we've seen in a long time. And so, Black voters are saying, thank you, right? Thanks to our allies. Thanks for being there. Thanks for being in the room and speaking up for these injustices. But I think that now it's about, what is that greater agenda? Especially in the context of this historical moment, this opportunity to have the nation's first African American vice president. What is the agenda all the way down the ticket? And it's not just about that one seat, right? It's about all of the other opportunities that we can close the representation gap, that we can close these inequity gaps and really start building a justice for all kind of country.
Thank you. That fills in kind of the picture right there, right? The awakening of the United States, right? Andrea, go ahead and take this next.
Sure. So we have questions in the Q&A. And so I'm going to take a little creative license as a moderator. And Dulce actually has a time commitment. So I want to pose a couple questions to her, and then she does have to leave. But so first, and we can ask the other panelists this too, but Dulce, can you give us a sense of sort of how Latinx voters are sort of responding or not responding to various party appeals? Is that something that you're hearing about from your community? And then sort of thinking about from a community standpoint, do you think that campaigns are being effective in their outreach to the Latinx community? If not, what might they do better?
Yeah, so I know that there's been a huge sentiment in the community, both as anecdotal and some studies that have been done, that, time and time again, we keep hearing we're not getting contacted by the campaigns. There's not enough reach. There's not enough persuasion, not enough wooing. And people are up for being wooed. And, right now that is the number one thing that we're hearing. Number two thing that we're hearing is that, Latinx voters want to know that immigration issue is top in their priority, and they want to know that who they're voting for is going to make sure that there's going to be meaningful impact and legislation coming. There's a lot on the line for our TPS families that have temporary protective status. There's a lot on the line for our youth that have DACA or are in a mixed family status. For those that are not familiar, these are both very just temporary immigration status, and right now they're in danger under this administration. So people want to know, what's going to happen. I can vote, but what about my cousin who has DACA? What's his going to future be like? And it's all going to be resting on my vote. So they want a more harder position on immigration issues mostly. And then there's also on the line the communities that are seeking asylum on the border. we tend to forget that our communities are mostly in mixed status families. So, this is one of like the nuances, I guess, for I'm not an expert in other communities, but in the Latinx community especially, so that is one of the biggest issues. And then just to add to that, Latinos are going to be the second biggest voting bloc for the first time in this presidential election. So there's a lot up for grabs. So we definitely want to make sure that the campaigns are hearing us out, and that there are putting the needs of those that are going to be first-time voters, and definitely making sure that they're being spoken to, and not just taking advantage for a vote. That is super important. I think that's why we're gathering. We're trying to strategize. How do we do this? And not lose these voters. The first time that they're going to vote is going to be meaningful and impactful, and it's going to set us on a path for the next election and the next election. So we want to get this right. These are first-time voters that really want to make sure that they're getting informed on the process, on their rights, that they're making sure that they feel like their vote is getting counted, they're not getting disenfranchised.
So right now I'm looking at some questions in the Q&A section here, and for Dulce, because you're going to be leaving us soon, I'm going to kind of blend some questions, thinking about whatever barriers exist to getting people registered to vote. To what degree is language, maybe finding people who are bilingual or monolingual in either English or Spanish, and maybe indigenous languages as well, getting people registered to vote? And then also, do you think that Latinos are being overlooked because of the fiscal cost to get Latinos to the poll? Is there some way that we can compare Latinos to other groups in that kind of effort of getting people to the poll? So basically the question is around barriers to voting and registration.
Yeah, I think when talking about how do we reach these hard to reach communities, the first thing that I talk about is language access. And, I think there's sometimes a confusion of, well, I'm just going to translate this using like Google or whatever to get out a flyer or to do some text banking. And the number one issue with that is that we tend to forget that you need to make sure that you're curtailing message, that you're keeping the same, not just semantics, but the same urgency, the same appeal, but also, making sure that you're speaking to the person that you're trying to reach based on their needs, their current situation. So yeah, there is a huge there has been for a few years, this huge gap in trying to reach the Latinx community that is already hard to reach, but trying to speak to them in their language, right? In terms of that our community is feeling spoken to instead of being just told to, if that makes sense. On top of that, you have all these other nuances, right? Not finding sites readily available in their language that can assist them and that can be easy for them to navigate when trying to register to vote. This is why Voto Latino, we have it available on our main website, votolatino.org, and you can choose the language. We have a Voter Pal app that, again, you can, when you download it, switch the language, and very easily you can set that up. We do it by text, but it's super important to acknowledge other languages and making sure that there's access for that, and that that those accessible links are getting out to the community. I think those are like the top two issues.
Thank you. Let's turn it to a question for OJ. We're being asked, can you please explain the local efforts on reservations, in particular, to register Indigenous people for the purpose of voting?
Well, we basically just completed a voter registration drive in Arizona, Minnesota, South Dakota, in the past 12 days, and we have registered about 10,000 Native Americans on the reservations there. We do have problems with the ID. In some places, you cannot use your tribal ID. You have to have a state ID. Some places, they allow you to use your tribal ID and in your state ID. I mean, so it really depends on the area you're at. And then once you turn in the voter registration cards, that's when the problems start, because then you get the local election officials becoming worried. It's kind of like Custer coming over the hill at the Little Bighorn saying, where'd all these Indians come from? And, start questioning whether or not the registration is valid. So we have ongoing operations in different states on different reservations. And regardless of the barriers, we do find ways around it, and we do ensure that our people are registered to vote. One more quick thing, our tradition, our custom always relied on elders. And one of the things we've found going forward is we relied on our future generation. So we looked at the future generation of motivating their grandmas, their grandpas, their aunts, their uncles. And so it wasn't so much the political party as it was their relatives saying, Grandma, I need you to vote. Uncle, I need you to vote. So when we come into something like this, sometimes that's why we started our organization, because we didn't like the reception we got from the political parties. So sometimes it is us that is going to be the message barriers, and is going to be the future generation that is going to get the older generation to follow behind you.
I love it. Getting the next generation ready and expecting, right, them to like step into the role, right? How about, let's bring on Becky. We have a question for you. Can you please explain the voter registration efforts in Pennsylvania and in Houston?
Sure. There are very robust voter registration efforts being made in Pennsylvania through our coalition, Pennsylvania Voice. They've been really supporting people of color organizations and registering as many voters as possible. So there have been, it's very challenging, of course, because of COVID. So everyone had their plan and had to redo their plan once the pandemic started. But we've been doing a lot of phone banking and text banking to register voters. And also at UD Center, we have been going to the Asian markets a couple of days a week and doing socially distanced tabling, and actually put together like some pandemic care packages that have like hand sanitizer and masks and things like that, and some voter information inside of them, and wearing gloves and masks and of course and everything, and then reaching out and working with some of our volunteers that are in our college students and making sure that their fellow students are registered to vote or registered to vote at the correct address. So so that's all been happening here in Pennsylvania, and so we're going right up to the deadline of October 19th, coming Monday. And there's going to be a final push that's being supported by Voice through the digital ads.
Really quick before we move on to the next question, I was speaking to somebody today in Pennsylvania, and they were talking to me about this really specific process about 2 envelopes. Are you familiar with this thing about there needs to be, if you don't have both of the envelopes, like a naked ballot or something, that there's going to be some kind of problems? Do you know about this issue?
When you're doing the mail-in ballot, you have to put it, yes, you have to, are you talking about mail-in ballots?
Yes.
That must be what you're talking. Yes, you do have to, put it back in the sealed envelope and send it back in, or put it in the drop box.
Okay. I'm hearing that there was some kind of like two ballot thing, which was a recent push by a particular administration to make it maybe a little more difficult.
I think they're just trying to make it as, it seems to be, they're trying to make it as confusing as possible.
Uh-huh.
So there's been a lot of misinformation is being put out there to voters. Very,
We've
very
actually
challenging,
had
but that's what
individuals.
we've been trying to.
OJ, can you come on and say that again?
We've actually had individuals that have received dual ballots in the mail. So we are looking into that. They blame it on contract workers and things like that, but dual ballots are popping up in different places in Indian country.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's something to be on the lookout. Thank you for that. We have a question from somebody who says they managed a get out the vote effort for a national nonprofit, and they said that we're hearing an increased need for Portuguese materials. Is there anyone who's providing translation for this in some other lesser spoken languages? If this is to everybody, I guess. Portuguese.
I have not, but we can definitely connect. I don't know if my email is going to get shared out or not, but you can definitely contact us at Voto Latino, and we can try to see what we can do. We can possibly get those out translated or see what we already have. Yeah, we can definitely help out with that or find a resource that already has them, so we don't recreate the wheel and support other organizations.
Dulce, if I have your permission, I can give that person your email. Just don't want to name names from our audience on our recording.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much. We have a question for Kara, and it is, what about those Latinos that are fluent in English and are registered voters, but are not being contacted by either political party? Second, third, fourth generation Latinos. Maybe this is also a question I think they'll say I'll have to go soon. Does fiscal cost determine what groups get some sort of outreach? Data indicates that 93 cents on every dollar is used for Latino outreach. Is this cost too high for political parties?
Well, Dulce, do you have any strong thoughts on that before you go?
Take it away.
Well, so there's a lot to unpack in there. Ultimately, the individual campaign has to answer a couple of questions. What are we about? What are we trying to tell people? And who are we trying to talk to, right? And so ultimately, when the dollars are allocated in a campaign, it is around those two goals. What are we saying? And who are we trying to talk to? And so if the goal is specifically to reach the Latinx community, then a majority of those dollars are going to be allocated there. The cost of getting people out to vote, regardless of who that voter is determined on a lot of things. New voters tend to be more expensive, air quotes, than people that vote consistently. Your likely voters are coming. They're showing up. It's more about persuading them to go one way or the other, whereas new voters need a little more massaging, right? It's okay, you caught me at the farmer's market, I went on and signed up to vote, now you got to talk to me 10 more times to even remind me that the election is going on. Then you got to talk to me 7 more times to talk to me about your issue or the person you want me to vote for. Then you got to call me 6 more times to get me to actually come. That doesn't matter if you're Latino, Black, white. If you're a new first-time voter, it's just more work to get the culture of voting going. And so that's why we talk so much about the importance of in between cycles, the work has to keep going. So we can't just look at, as OJ said, the presidential races and the governor's races and these big races. We have to work at these local levels to build up the culture of voting, because voting and elections are happening in some cities, every 6 to 8 months. You could be voting for mayor. 6 months later, you're voting for your state representative. Then your council is coming back around. Then you could be looking at school board. And so if you build a culture of voting where folks are voting at the local level instead of just voting every 4 years, then we'll see the cost of turnout go down.
Okay, that's really helpful, because a lot of us don't get a peek at that type of work, and so this is really informative. Who among our panelists has time to go to 8:15.
I can stay on.
Is that possible? Or maybe 8:10? OJ, Becky, do you think
Yeah,
you can do that?
I can stand for a bit.
Okay, OJ, could you tell us about the court cases that you referenced earlier today?
Sure. Basically, the case that we filed is called Yazzie versus Hobbs, and it's in Arizona. And what it is that Arizona is basically forcing a lot of people to vote by mail because of the pandemic. And we normally, our Native organizations oppose vote by mail because it does not work for Indian country. But being that we were looking at being forced into that situation, what we did is we looked into what different people had to do in order to vote by mail. And one of the things we found was in Scottsdale, on a bad day, you didn't have to open your door and check your mail. You got to walk to the end of your driveway to check your mail. You had 27 days in to do it. And of that 27, 2 days would be used to get the mail or the ballot to the reporter. If you're a Navajo and you live on a Navajo Indian reservation, such as Navajo Mountain, if you're going to go check your mail, what you're going to do is basically go out. First of all, you can see if you have gas, and then you're going to check your transmission, you can check your oil, you can check your water. You're going to make sure you have water in the car somewhere and some food, because you might break down because some of it's through the desert. And then you're going to drive like 38 miles and you're going to check your mail. And then most of the people, I don't know if a lot of people are aware, but in order for you to even run for president, vice president, or an office in Navajo, you have to speak fluent Navajo. That is their first language. And so when you get there and you get your ballot, first of all, it took 5 to 7 days for it to get there, and you had to kind of guess if it was. But if everything worked out right and you got it, then you take it back because you don't, English isn't your first language. You take it back, you got to find an interpreter to interpret it to you in the Navajo language. And then you got to turn around and drive another 38, 40 miles back to deliver it. And what we found is that the white people in Scottsdale, 150 voting age population, could take care of all of it in 2 days. But if you were a Navajo living on the Navajo Nation, you lost 2/3, if not more time just using the mail. And then you had to find an interpreter. So what it came down to is if you were a white person living in Scottsdale or Phoenix or one of the metropolitan areas, that you would have 25 days to cast your ballot. But if you're a native or a member of the Navajo Nation, you would have anywhere from 10 to 13 days to cast your ballot. And that's what we were putting before the court. It's unequal. It's not a denial. It's a delusion. It's taken and lessening the amount of voters that can participate in the election because of how you have your system set up. We're not blaming the post office. And so what we did is we asked them to extend it for 10 days so that if your ballot was postmarked on election day, it would still be counted 10 days later. And that's what we're fighting for in the appellate court. That's what we had arguments on today for.
Thank you. Are there any other cases that come to mind that you would like people to know about today?
Yeah, another one that's really important. Again, when we start talking about equality, a lot of places have in-person absentee voting, or they have early voting. The only difference is in-person absentee voting is if you vote and you pass away, your vote don't count, whereas early voting, you vote, your vote counts. I mean, but just get that straight. But what we found was that if natives wanted to participate in that in-person absentee voting or early voting, in my case, I would have to travel 100 miles round trip in order to cast my ballot early. And so we looked at that and we actually filed lawsuits in South Dakota. I had to file it twice, but we were able to establish satellite offices on the reservation. We did it in Montana and was able to establish satellite offices on the reservation, and then in Nevada. And then while that was going on, because of these court cases, other satellite offices throughout Indian country was established. But the reason I'm bringing this up, and I wanted to make sure you're aware of it, we won these cases in the court, especially Sanchez versus Sagaski in Nevada. But we won these cases because of extremes. But I have always said that people of color in different parts of the community, if you got to take a bus for 4 hours to go vote early, then it's not equal. If you have to take in anything that another person, a person that is not a protective class, can vote easier than you or has more ways to vote from you, it's not equal. So it's just not Native Americans. And so let's start looking at places where we have communities of color, insisting on the poll watchers being from that community and being people of color. And instead of having a polling place where you ride a bus for 4 hours or 2 hours in order to get there to cast your early ballot, demand a satellite office within your community so you have the same access of early voting as, basically, I'll put it bluntly, white people. And so that's one of the things that I think we need to take out of here, is the fact that people of color have that same opportunity now to establish early voting within their communities. So they have, like here in South Dakota, we have 46 days. So we now have 46 days to early vote, just like they do off reservation. And I think that's something you should look at, or at least talk to attorneys about, to see whether or not that is possible within the communities.
Thank you, OJ. I feel like you're bringing a lot to the attention of people like who just aren't hearing these stories, right? And it's not because of your lack of trying to get it out there, right? We need to disseminate this information. Before we sign off, I'm wondering if Kara, is there anything that you want to dispel or leave our audience with today, thinking about kernels of information that like what OJ is saying, just don't get out enough? Like what do they need to know?
In terms of voting or campaigns, or
Either one, actually.
What I would say to everybody listening right now, especially those of you advocating for, electoral justice and election justice, is really get informed. Across this country, the laws are changing very quickly. Some states have said you don't have to sign the outside of the envelope to turn in your absentee ballot. Then folks go to court and they decide, well, yes, you do. And what happens if you've already turned yours in? There's a lot of disinformation about the post office and is it working? And if I mail my ballot, will it get there in time? There's a lot of voter suppression tactics going on right now. And so the best thing that we can do as we advocate for election justice is to make sure people are informed. You need to know if you need an ID. You need to know if you need that ID to match a current light bill or an address. You need to know who you can call if you get to the voting booth after standing in line for an hour and they can't find your name. You need to know where you're supposed to vote.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to tell a person, especially if you are, that person standing in the voting location is a person of authority. And they say, hey, you're at the wrong location. You're supposed to vote across town. You need to be sure before you walk in the door where you're supposed to vote so that you can challenge and question, why you're being asked to drive across town. And know the process. Know when you should ask for a provisional ballot. Know how to explain if you've had to change your address or you recently got married, or if there's some type of information that's being used to turn you away. So go in armed and prepared is what I would tell people. Don't just walk away from the voting booth, because what's at stake here is your vote. It is your time. And by the time you circle the wheel to find out, oh, that really is my location, you may not be able to get back across time in time. You may not be able to stand in line long enough because you got to go back to work or you've got to pick up your child. So make your plan to vote. Know the facts around your voting situation, and then be prepared to advocate for yourself if you get challenged.
Right. Thank you for that. Everyone, this has been really great. Thank you for getting through this with us with our technical difficulties earlier. We want to thank Kara Turrentine, OJ Semans, Dulce Rojas, and Becky Belcore. We also want to give you a heads up about our next event on the following Tuesday on the 20th. We have a forum called Enfranchising Returning Citizens, Ending Felonism Through Electoral Action and Voter Mobilization. We will have Keita Haynes, who is a legal advisor with Free Hearts, Neil Voles, who's the Deputy Director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and Norris Henderson, who's the founder and Executive Director of Voice of the Experience and Voters Organize to Educate. If you can go onto Eventbrite right now, you can find our next event registration. And also, if you look at, most of you saw the website. It's here. I can put it in the chat before we leave, and you can just go to it right now. So again, I want to thank you so much. I'm going to put this in the chat, and everyone, thank you so much. Come out and vote. Go vote, vote.